Perfect. I mean, this is a project management institute event, so if the logistics are not working, that would be quite shocking. So first of all, I am, like I said, I'm extremely delighted for this opportunity to interact with project managers in Ghana. I found this a really exciting invitation because I've always wondered, I mean, who are the leaders of all these massive projects that we see going on all over Accra and elsewhere? And of course, if you think of the government sector, you know, the massive projects that are ongoing in the government sector must, I presume, and you tell me if that's true or not, but also have project managers in charge of that. So as a policy analyst who is very concerned about Ghana and a lot of these massive projects, think of the Ghana, the National Cathedral, the Palagu Dam, the interchanges, etc. Looking at all of these things, I've always wondered, what is the nature of the conversations that project managers like yourself have when you see some of the failures and the successes and how that goes. Unfortunately, we rarely have this type of opportunity. And so my hope in accepting this invitation was that we'll have a dialogue among ourselves as project managers and policy analysts with a very different lens, that we look at some of these things. And the presentation that I have, I understand that I have about an hour to interact with you, and then we can perhaps delve into some of the issues in much greater detail. You have to forgive me. The very first half of the presentation, or rather, the presentation itself is primarily in lecture format, so it's not as interactive. But I assure you that once the presentation ends, I hope to have a very interactive session with all of you and to see how we have to put this on my mouth for the online audience. Okay, so at the end of the presentation, I hope to have a much more interactive exercise. So to start, I'm going to, like I said, I think what is happening is it only goes forward, I think. Kind of strange. Oh, I think I understand what this. I need to use a different button. Perfect. Yeah. So, like I said, this is a conversation amongst project managers and policy analysts that are active in Ghana. And the hope that I have for this talk is that through this interaction, we will come to some common ground about what matters, what is important, how we see things differently from you guys, and how we can perhaps start to work more closely together in particularly the area of interest that I have nowadays, public financial management, the challenges that we have as a country in executing large projects, the cost to the nation, and often the failures that leaves even bigger cost at the end of the day. So that is the hope that I have. And I thought that I will focus on this particular tool as an interesting common ground between project managers and policy analysts. So we have our different tools, and there are tools that we have that are not very relevant to you as project managers. But I think cost-benefit analysis is the one tool. Am I in the way of those of you in this side? No. So I think cost-benefit analysis is the one tool that both of us, the different categories of project managers and policy analysts can use as a common interface for conversation. It's a tool that we use in different ways, but most of the principles, most of the underlying concepts, the way it is applied, etc., is very important commonly between us. So I think that would be more or less the central thrust of the entire presentation. I'm going to take a number of case studies. First of all, I'm going to give you an overview of what cost-benefit analysis are. Even though this is a project management meeting, we can't make the assumption that everybody is familiar in great detail. So I will go over it, some of the key highlights. And then once I've done that, I will try and cover some of the nuances of the use of the tool. And after having covered those nuances, I will touch on two case studies. One more in-depth, the issue of the National Cathedral. One far less so, the Palagu Dam. And then one almost offhand, and that is the Agenda 111. So those will be my case studies for trying to get us into this whole cost-benefit analysis debate. So what is cost-benefit analysis? I mean, it's very straightforward. You want to do a project, or you've started working on a project, some other stakeholder, or sometimes yourself decide, because often if you are the one proposing the project, then presume that you already want to go ahead anyway. So I will assume it's another stakeholder who then looks at the cost of the project, and I will try and establish in this presentation that the cost can often be much variegated or much more complex than sometimes people think. There are quite a number of costs that a lot of people ignore when they're looking at projects. So I'll try and use the examples that we have, the 2 case studies, to delve into that a little bit. Sometimes the benefits. The benefits are interesting because sometimes avoided costs are benefits. And if you're not tuned on that way, you kind of miss a lot of benefits because you are looking at direct benefits, whereas avoided costs, avoided damage, avoided risk, etc., could all be benefits. So benefits can also get very complicated, and I'll try and go into that. So you look at the costs of the project, and you try and be as broad-minded as possible. Once you have a list of those costs, you kind of tally them up. Then you look at the benefits of the project, and you look at the benefits not only in terms of the direct benefits, but it also looks at avoided cost and certain other types of benefits that often are intangible and require a bit more analysis in order to tease out. I'll also try and point out that when you're trying to do the benefits evaluation, sometimes, compared to cost, and this is my view, compared to cost, benefits tend to be less certain. My view is that costs are more certain, particularly for experienced project managers. Nobody has built a national cathedral in Ghana, but a lot of people have built a lot of church buildings and a lot of large auditoriums in Ghana. So you have a good sense in terms of estimating cost. Quantity surveyors can do a much better job with the cost. When it comes to benefits, my view is that it gets a bit more philosophical. And so intangibles become more preponderant. The intangibles in the benefits become more preponderant than it's the case of costs. So that means that the way you evaluate benefits can be somewhat a different discipline compared to the way you evaluate costs. And I think cost accountants and management accountants and all of these people are very deep disciplines. Whereas on the benefit side, a lot of the time we leave that to monitoring and evaluation professionals. And monitoring evaluation professionals in many parts of the world, particularly in Africa, are not as certified and chartered in the way that I think cost accountants and other types of accountants and auditors are on the cost side of the spectrum. So comparing cost to benefits, the disciplines that you bring into either could be quite different. That's the point I want to make. So once you look at cost, once you look at benefits, the next stage then to evaluate whether or not you want to go ahead with the project or whether or not the project is beneficial. Some projects you have to go ahead anyway because there are other reasons why you're doing the project. So I'll give you a practical example. Ghana having a presidential palace of some kind. Some people will say that no matter what you think is going to happen because politically we've determined that we'll do it. Or think about, something like the decision to have a parliament building, because the parliament can meet anywhere the speaker convenes, right? But having a parliament building as a place that you can point to, I will argue it's a political decision. And it doesn't matter what the cost and the benefits are, it's going to happen. So sometimes it's going to happen nonetheless. But there are other reasons why you want to do cost benefit analysis, and I'll come to that in a moment. So if the costs significantly outweigh the benefits, the logic is that if you're being rational, then don't do it or don't continue. If the benefits outweigh the costs or are equal to the cost, it's a break even, then more or less you continue. So that's both the most simple way of trying to explain what is, I think, a fairly profound concept. Of course, the decision of whether or not to run can also be time dependent. So you can say that, okay, look at the factors prevailing today, no, but the cost and benefit might change with time. And how the cost and benefit might evolve over time is a major source of the inputs into my analysis, whether to do it or not to do it. So that also matters. And there are several other nuances that I'll come into as we go forward. In fact, you can also use cost benefit analysis to rank, right? Let's say you have 5 options. You have a fixed budget. And in fact, the general economic or the most established point in economics is that resources are scarce. So you'll never be able to do all the things you want to do, which means, therefore, that as a country, as a people, as a business, you have to have options, right? You have to have options for your investment. So you can decide that, do I put more money into customer service, or do I put more money into my brand and how I look, or do I put more money into my factory and expanding my factory, improving my efficiency, or do I put more money into marketing and pay my sales workers more? Traditionally, you can take each of these as a project. If I decide to do more customer service, you can take that as a project. And you can do your cost benefit analysis for each of the options. And then based on how the costs and the benefits match up, the ratio. So you take the cost and you take the benefits. Obviously, if it's above 1, or you can put the benefits at the top, it doesn't matter there. But if you put the benefits at the top, then if the ratio is above 1, then it means that the benefits significantly outweigh the costs. And if it's below, then the costs outweigh the benefits. So by just doing that, you can see, and you can rank all the projects and say, okay, this one is 1.2, 1.3, 0.5, etc. And therefore, this is the ranking order. So we do this first and that first and that first. Of course, it can get very complex because, like I said to you, it can be time dependent. It can also be critical path dependent, which I'll come to in the last case study, which is to say that you may have to do certain things for certain costs to materialize and for certain benefits to materialize. So let's say you want to build you decide that, okay, in Ghana, we need a really good forest reserve for tourism because the East Africans are eating our lunch. Nobody thinks of Ghana when you think of wildlife. So we think we have some wildlife. So let's build that. Somebody say, yeah, you know what? Our current laws and things like that are not very helping because poachers are going to kill all the animals. Our international marketing from the embassies and the rest is not very good. So if we did it, people will not know about it. Maybe we've partnered with Ivory Coast, and because of that, they're going to let certain elephants come from their side of it to our side. Or there's so many preconditions. And then you say, we're going to have to do this, do that in a sequence. And along the way, as we realize each of those plans, we can then decide, when to move and when not to move. For those of you that are very familiar with the project management environment, we call that stage gating, right? You determine at what point what to depend. But if you do that, then you have a critical pathway. And then that leads to a general challenge where we call critical pathway dependence, where it's often not clear what the cost and the benefits are unless all the preconditions are met in a particular sequence. Contracting, we then say conditions precedent, conditions subsequent, to try and capture some of that. If the contract was between Ghana and Togo to make Ghana a top hub for natural resource tourism, but then the Togolese are supposed to contribute something, we can put some of these critical path dependencies into the contract in the form of conditions precedent. As you say, this will happen if this happens, etc. So my point is that not only can you use that to rank, but you can also perform sensitivity analysis by saying that, you know what, there is some uncertainty that this cost will materialize in this fashion or this benefit will materialize in that fashion, right? If that is the case, then one of the things you do is you do a determination as to what is more likely and what is not as likely, and you look at the chain of that impact, and your critical path dependency will then change completely. What must happen before something else happens? So you can get really, really complicated around the sensitivities because things are not certain. You want to build a national cathedral, great. You have an architect, brilliant. What if the architect signs off at some point? And part of the appeal of the cathedral was who designed it. You still continue or don't you continue? And even if you continued, what would that change in terms of the benefits? So how you then all of a sudden design the critical pathway to completing the project may change, which may then change the cost and the benefits and how they materialize, which may then change whether or not you want to do it. So your sensitivity analysis is based on your ability to estimate uncertainty, right? To determine whether certain costs and benefits might materialize. The other thing is also this notion of strategic complements. Let's say you are doing that because you anticipate something else will happen. So let's say you say, okay, you know what? Ghana plans to make its capital city, Dodowa. It's on the books. We've been thinking about this for the last 30 years, right? Or 25 years at least, that the future capital of Ghana is Dodowa. And then all of a sudden, of course, our national planning completely degenerates. So nobody talks about it anymore. But imagine that when it was very important and you had that plan that, Dodowa will be the national capital, a whole bunch of things that today will not be sensible in Dodowa become sensible. Let's say all of a sudden the government changes and that was their manifesto promise, right? In that kind of scenario, you can say, okay, because the national capital is Dodowa, then the national capital planning project is a complement to my project to build a big tertiary hospital in Dodowa. It's a strategic complement. If the decision to develop a new capital does not proceed, then the decision to build a tertiary hospital in Dodowa doesn't make sense. Dodowa doesn't have the people to justify having a tertiary hospital there, right? So strategic complements will often then determine whether or not one project is making sense or not. Because if you decide to put a tertiary hospital in Dodowa, but the capital does not move to Dodowa, all of a sudden the value of the hospital drops dramatically, the benefits. Because people may not decide to move from when they can go to Kuala Lumpur to go all the way to Dodowa for a tertiary facility. But you may then change your mind and say, okay, you know what? We still don't have a good cancer facility at the tertiary level. So even though we have Kuala Lumpur and I'm competing with UGMC and the rest, I'll put a cancer facility in Dodowa. That then all of a sudden changes the dynamic. But in that sense, in a way, it's also another strategic complement. Because the way you are thinking of it is that, okay, we have a tertiary facility at UGMC, we have one at Kuala Lumpur, we have one here, we have one there. But it lacks a cancer facility. So the way I see my project is that my cancer facility at the Dodowa Tertiary Hospital is a strategic complement to Kwalebu, to UGMC, etc., etc. And if I can actually sometimes formalize that strategic complement by having a partnership, so I go to UGMC and we sign an agreement, you refer your cancer patient to me, it changes the value of the project completely. And all of a sudden, the benefits are different. So your scientific analysis is somehow also linked to how you think about strategic complement sometimes, right? Because how you design those contracts could change the way you do this. In fact, in contract theory, we have something that says that there is nothing like a complete contract. Every contract is an incomplete contract because you can never anticipate everything, right? You always have to make assumptions that there are things that you cannot anticipate. So a lot of the things that you do, even though there's a contract, is based on continuous negotiation. So you decide that, okay, you know what, I'm going to sign a contract to build a hospital. And the way it's going to work is that I'll bring all the personnel in the hospital. You bring all the equipment. And then this person will build a hospital. And then along the way, I find out that actually there's a strike in Ghana, so I can't bring the people. Half the time, you may not have anticipated that. And of course, there may be force majeure or other kind of things that may get you out. But sometimes that's not what you want to do. You want to go ahead. And then you don't want to make a direct amendment to the contract. So you change the contract in practice. It's not what is in the contract. That's why people often say that sometimes you go to a contract only when things are bad. Like very few people collaborating. Every time they want to do something, they pick up the contract and say, okay, what am I allowed to do and what am I not allowed to do? Let me talk to the lawyer first. You want me to bring you some plantain chips to your shop? Good. Oh, yeah, because we signed the contract, I'll deliver. But let me talk to my lawyer first, whether I can use the HEAS track or how to change it to the oven van. The people are going to think maybe there's something wrong with you. Because those kinds of decisions, you don't go and refer back to the contract, right? You kind of build a practice around the contract. And that practice is a matter of trust. Projects also sometimes work that way. If you've managed any project before, you know that maybe 30% or 40% of the things you do were not anticipated in the contract. So that goes back to the point around sensitivity, strategic complements, etc. Because of that uncertainty level, sometimes what we have is that we're not able to use point estimates for a lot of the decisions we make. If it's a really high stakes project, a lot of money at stake, and the people that are designing and building this project are extremely sophisticated, like really sophisticated people. What they will do is that in estimating some of the cost and the benefits, they will move on from using point estimates. Like you say, okay, I talked to an expert and he said to me that if I build a tertiary hospital in Dodowa for cancer patients, the number of people who attend who have cancer are 5,000. And because cancer will kill this number of people, avoided mortality is this. And my number is $1 million. And that's it. Because I've talked to some experts. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. If it's a sophisticated person who's reviewing it, there's a lot of uncertainty there. What if the road doesn't get built? And so people don't like to go to Dodowa because of the road. What if the traffic at Darwin or whatever becomes worse? Whatever. So all of those things mean that sometimes the estimation process itself requires dedicated, specialized tools like Monte Carlo simulation, right? So in these kinds of tools, you deal with randomness and stochastic outcomes. You deal with things that are not predictable. So it's almost like, you gamble with the data. You do it in a very ordered way that leaves certain probabilities, and then you have certain numbers, and then you put in the Excel sheet. You literally say, I cannot do a point estimate for each of these. So I toss about some possibilities, and then the software spits out some numbers, and then you incorporate those numbers into your modeling. You see what? So this is obviously not the kind of lecture where we go into great detail, but I'm trying to explain to you that what you might think is simple about, okay, the benefit of a hospital, actually when it gets down to trying to think through it, you have to be very open-minded about the kind of tools you may end up using because of the uncertainties involved. You don't know how many patients will show up. You don't know whether those patients will actually be saved. And on benefits, it's even worse. And I'll come to that again. That also gives us another opportunity, which is all along I've talked about one project, or at the very least, a set of options, which I'm choosing one. Sometimes what you have is that you have a plan to develop a number of outcomes, and you have projects that feed into it. So 24-hour economy, right? I mean, maybe 100 projects, maybe 1,000 projects, nobody knows. But if you are thinking like the way I'm thinking, one of the things you do is say, okay, what are some of the components of the 24-hour economy, right? And say, okay, one of them is we want to boost productivity by targeting particular industries. It's okay. So there's going to be a project to target particular industry. Okay, what is the budget? And then you do a cost benefit analysis for that project, right? But then that project as a whole must feed into the 24-hour economy plan, the framework. So you would think of the entire cost-benefit analysis for that project as one input into your meta model. You say, okay, the benefit, the project that says that we want to improve the night economy. That's one project. And you say, okay, night economy where? You say, okay, specific cities. You say, which cities? You say cities that have been determined as grade A cities. Like the way they do in China, right? They've got certain cities that are grade A, they've got certain provinces that are grade B, and certain cities that are grade A are more important than whole provinces in China. So you say, okay, in Ghana, we have 7 cities, which we've determined as a band A or grade A or whatever you want to call it, tier 1. And these 7 cities, we want to the night economy in those cities, right? And you say, okay, how much would that cost? And what does that entail? Is it more street lights, more security, more this? What is that benefit? What is the cost? But when you finish all of that, you need to input that into the bigger framework, because what you are analyzing is not the night economy in Takoradi or Tamale. What you analyze is the 24-hour economy. So your cost-benefit analysis are merely inputs into that framework. I hope that's getting clearer. So you think of cost-benefit analysis sometimes as, the end all, but what I'm trying to say is that sometimes the whole analysis is just one input into a bigger framework. So if you look at a spreadsheet, you can think of multiple cost-benefit analysis, and all of that is feeding into certain cells. And then you have your framework set up. And at the end of the day, you can tally those up again and say, okay, what are all the ratios for this particular approach versus this particular approach? So that would be a simple way to evaluate a project like 24-hour economy. Like I also tried to explain, in all of these things, then you get into very fascinating, complicated stuff based on scenario, because you get one output if you put in this particular, but not that particular project. So let's say 24-hour economy, and there's one that is on night economy, one that is on strategic industries. There is one that is primarily about, lifting employment in particular areas that we think are important. And you take all of those and say, okay, but if I take this whole one out, how does the tally cost-benefit analysis of the whole 24-hour economy, how does it play out? So in a sense, once you start putting in these different cost-benefit analysis into the spreadsheet, and you start to take one out, add one in, and you will see the numbers start to change. And you can begin to think, okay, what are the actual right projects to put in the spreadsheet, which gives me the best cost-benefit ratio overall, right? So that could be one way in which you analyze it. So let's go back again to them, everything we've learned so much about cost-benefit analysis. This is not a sexy subject that we are trying to make sexy, right? So I have to do some recap. One, you define the problem. What are you trying to solve? Because that's the nature of a project. So if you decide that it's 24-hour economy, what are you trying to solve? Maybe 3 things, maybe unemployment, maybe underutilization of capacity. We have a lot of factories and hotels that are not full, etc. Maybe the third thing you are trying to solve is the fact that our cities are not livable because, we close too early and therefore there's too much traffic because everybody's doing the thing at the same time. So you want to spread out and make the city more livable. If those are your outcomes, then those are the problems you're trying to solve. Then these are the projects, right? And then you move on and say, what are the options to solve each of them, right? For each of them, each option is a project on its own. So if you decide that the way I want to solve the problem of unemployment is that I want to solve the underutilization of capacity, somebody will say, well, maybe that's not a problem because maybe these factories are underutilized because we've not solved the primary production level. All these farmers and the rest are too backward. So before we even think about underutilization of capacity, let's go upstream. Let's go to the primary production level. The farmers, the fishermen, and things like that. Let's equip them rather before we even think about, why the factories and the rest are not full. If that is another option, you can do a cost-benefit analysis for both of them and obviously compare, which is what you do next. You predict the baseline. The baseline being, if I didn't do this, what will be there? That's a critical element that we often forget. Like we start projects and often there's no baseline definition because your starting point is to do nothing. The starting point for any project, the default comparator, the default benchmark, the default thing you are comparing that project with is if you didn't do anything at all. If we didn't build a national cathedral, if we didn't build a new national stadium, if we didn't build another tertiary hospital for cancer patients, what will happen if we didn't do anything? That's your starting point, right? The baseline. Then you think about, okay, but if I did this and I did that, what are the responses? Which is what will then get you into the cost and the benefits analysis, right? Because the responses are your benefits, the costs are your attempt to achieve those responses, what you spent, right? And then once you're done through, you can calculate what is the net benefits, the cost versus the benefits, and you get a certain number. You can say, okay, these are the total costs if I did this option. This is the total benefits if I did that option. This is the net. This is the cost over the benefits, or this is the benefits over the cost. And then if you have 3 projects, you compare which one has more benefits over costs. It's a very simple exercise in that sense. But the problem is the framing. And then you estimate how people benefit. That's another very complicated aspect, because not all projects benefit all people the same. So if you are a political party that gets a lot of your vote from the north, maybe Paluguda matters more, because Paluguda matters more to the north than to the south. If you are a political party that gets a lot of your votes from rural areas, maybe share butter projects that develop the value chain matters more than amazing hotels for tourism, because rural people don't benefit as much from that. So the distribution of the benefits can completely skew your entire analysis at that point. Sometimes the distribution of the cost even matter more. Why? Because it's where you spend the money. If you decide that you're going to improve flood management and you have to go to vote and build sea defense walls, the money goes into the communities in which you are building the sea defense walls, or the employment goes there. But if you decide that actually I think an airport in Ho is better, then the spending of, in terms of building the airport, the costs actually benefit certain people. And that's a fascinating way to twist your mind around that. The costs can be beneficial to certain people as well, independent of the benefits of the project. And that's a completely different way of actually framing the whole challenge. By looking at, okay, and that's where we get to the politics, right? What are the intermediate costs, and why are for some people those costs actually the benefits, not the final outcome of the project? And then you get into things like there are contractors for whom only the cost is an issue. I mean, the benefits are completely indispensable. And for the, let's say some party financier, and that party financier is going to give $5 million for the next campaign. And that $5 million is going to give the next campaign. He just wants some projects to match up with that. If that is the case, then for him or for her, those projects, in terms of their benefits, not that important. But the costs are important. What does that mean? He may want more costs and fewer benefits, if possibly. So maybe he's a financier for the opposition political party. So in that area, he would prefer that the hospital doesn't work, but he want to get paid anyway. So that you can get into some of these very fascinating kind of scenarios that make it all exciting. So now I come to the heart of my talk. How do project managers and policy analysts maybe see this differently in some ways? How do we work together? What unique skill do we bring? And how does that shape out? First of all, there are different ways you can look at it, like every institution. If you take your time, you sit down, you analyze, and you break it down, there's so many different ways you can go about it. But I'm going to focus on two. One of it is to say that typically the policies are at the very top. Then you generate plans from the policies. Then out of the plans from the policies, you have programs, right? So a program can be maternal mortality or reducing maternal mortality. That's a program, right? We want few women to die during childbirth. That's a program. But above, the reason why that's interesting to us at all is because we want to improve healthcare in Ghana, right? And the policy might be therefore that we want to improve the equity of health in Ghana. The certain vulnerable people whose health is often ignored, we want to tackle it. And then in making that decision, you have a plan. Okay, how will we do it? And you say, okay, we'll identify vulnerable groups and the way they interface with the health system. And then you move on and say, okay, now we identify, let's say, maternal women, women in childbirth in rural areas. You say, how do we target them and prevent them from dying? You say, maybe the biggest problem is getting them to a recognized midwifery center when they have a problem. Somebody say, no, that's silly. The best way is to get the midwife to the woman, because the midwife is healthy and can use whatever. Why the hell we want to put the woman in Aboboya and send them to a clinic when you can bring the midwife with some tools into the house and they can do it? All of those alternatives, you are now getting close to projects, because if you decide that you're going to go with Aboboya ambulances, you are at the project level now. Whereas the program level is a bit more advanced, right? Because there you are still thinking about some of the other factors other than how you spend money and how you get specific outputs. Anyway, policy analysts may be very effective here, and project managers may be much more effective here. So policy analysts, first two levels, and then so strategic level, then coming down to operational level. And project managers might be much better at the program and the project level. So one way you can frame the conversation is that maybe policymakers need to have a dialogue with project managers like yourself, more around how do the plans and the policies and the programs that are being developed, policies and the plans, how would that generate project options? So if I understood better the health issues in Ghana, and as a project manager, even if I'm great at building hospitals, my understanding is not really the health system of Ghana. I have under my belt 7 hospitals I've built in Ghana. I'm assuming, let's say there's somebody sitting in this room. He's a project manager. He's extremely good at building hospitals and managing hospitals. Sorry, not building hospitals, managing hospital construction and development. And then, but he doesn't really understand, should we choose certain hospitals in Western region versus Central region, or these are a bit complicated, maybe above, their pay grade in that sense. Whereas a policy analyst cannot build a hospital or manage a hospital, but they have a better sense of whether or not Western region needs a cancer hospital more now than Central region, because they operate at that level of the conversation, the policy design and the planning. Do we put this facility there for non-communicable diseases and that one for infectious diseases? Why? Also, because the migration pattern here means that if there was an outbreak of a disease, we are more likely to have a bigger challenge because of the way the migratory pattern works. And then somebody can even show you a map and prove to you that, if we had an outbreak in this town, within 1 hour, this city, there'll be infections here. This part of the country, there'll be an outbreak. This country here will be in a hotspot. That will not be a project manager, right? But if you show that to the project manager, he might look at that carefully and say, that this is my project here. The estimated demand will surge if there was an outbreak. So because of that, I think you need to expand the decontamination units, because there is a once in 2 year likelihood that you have an infection surge. So this capacity that you have given me, 50 people, full isolation, it doesn't add up. Because from what people are telling me, if there was an outbreak, this capacity will be overstrained. And then the person will say, you are not looking at the map well. If it's overstrained, overflow will go here, and overflow will go here. But my point is that the conversation around that, you need somebody on the policy level to have that conversation if you are doing it properly. Because it is likely that someone, no matter how smart, if they operate at project level, will be thinking at that systemic level. So that could be one way we think about the conversation between policy analysts and project managers. That could be one way. The other way, if you say that, no, actually what happens is that it's a kind of power dynamic. So the project managers the policy analysts are better understanding what will be funded, what will not be funded, what will be accepted, what will not be accepted. Because they understand the dynamics at the policy making level where the budgets are allocated better. They know which minister is crazy about this idea and not that idea, etc. So I'm more looking up to the policy analysts for insights about the viability of my project ideas, etc. That could be another way that we look at it in terms of the direct hierarchy. Another completely different way, but similar and related, is to look at this in terms of stakeholder management and the way that they break out. For a project person, you know your contractor, you know your architect if that the project is big enough, the employer, the person actually paying the bills. You kind of get a sense of who the construction contractors and those subcontractors are, and that's your stakeholder network. But a lot of time, that is not how projects really operate. I mean, think of the National Cathedral. You have the Christian Council of Ghana. Where do we position them? I mean, the Christian Council of Ghana, I think they have a lot of power. I also think they have a lot of interest in the cathedral. So they are players. But let me think of another group. Let me think of the Project Management Institute of Ghana. I think that you have a lot of interest because big projects help your members. I mean, a whole bunch of your members get jobs. But you don't have a lot of power in this kind of decision making. So you are somewhere there are subjects. You are the people that the power is being applied to. And then you can think of some of the people that are on Peace FM, Kokroko, and Calling. They have a lot of interest, but sometimes not at all. They don't even know what's going on, right? And then they don't have a lot of power, even though they listen a lot to Kokroko. So maybe they are part of the crowd, right? And then you have people that have a lot of power, but they have very limited interest. An example with traditional leaders, if you are building a national cathedral, they don't have a lot of interest in the national cathedral, but they have a lot of power. That's something the Yana. So in that area, they could become contest setters. They can bring aspects of the project that completely change the way you evaluate it, right? So my understanding of this is that for you as a project operator, the whole dynamic may be above you in terms of analyzing that stakeholder dynamic. And you may have to rely on a policy analyst who understand how the Asantehene will interplay. Because somebody will say, the Anglican Archbishop is very influential on Asantehene, and he wants the cathedral. So actually consider Asantehene a supporter. And you are sitting there like, how the hell did they make these decisions? Okay. But my point is, that is an area that somebody outside the project realm could be very useful if you are interacting, right? And you could think of it in the same way in terms of how you will engage with stakeholders and asking policy analysts for inputs, because they deal with these characters more often. They have a better idea of the vice president and his, who has more influence on her and things like that. Meanwhile, the project, she's in education, right? And you think it's a big educational project. And you are thinking, the vice president, is she going to be on board or is she not going to be on board? And why is that important to you? Because your bills may not get paid, right? Think of all the issues around Agenda 111. think of all the project managers in this country who somehow spent about the $400 million. Some of them are happy, some of them are not very happy. I mean, if you are one of those that have pending IPCs that have not been validated, you are very angry because it's become now completely confusing. I mean, is it going to go ahead? Is it not going to go ahead? Meanwhile, some people may have hired people, you have done all of these things, but $400 million spent, you got a little piece of it, maybe $1 million of it, and now you have $1 million locked in there, you don't know where to go. And whether are we going, are we coming as a country, right? I think in those dynamics, your project management knowledge doesn't help you a lot. You need someone with a better understanding of what the policy environment looks like, who might put in some money. In Palugu Dam, for instance, the World Bank was a critical player because it had a lot of power and had a lot of interest. But the World Bank had decided that for Palugu Dam, it didn't make sense. The numbers were the amount of money for the benefits were just too ridiculous. I'll give you a practical example. At some point, about the power plant, the dam, was going to cost almost $400 million and to generate 17 megawatts. Those numbers may not mean anything to you, but Akosombo generates 1,000 megawatts, right? So if something is going to generate 17 megawatts, you are talking of maybe half of East Legon capacity because Accra is really massive. So you are going to build a power plant somewhere in the north and it only produces power to half of East Legon. And like, doesn't make sense, right? But in those circumstances, the World Bank was critical because it was one of the few donors that are taking time to follow the journey of Palugu Dam. And once the government lost the World Bank, the likelihood that project was ever going to get funded was lost. If you had asked me then, let's say you were a project manager and you were in the project somehow, maybe your contractor is your key stakeholder and has asked you to do some due diligence. And you ask me, I'll tell you that thing will never work because without external funding and the then finance minister claiming that he will fund it out of the budget and use Eurobond proceeds, I will have assured you that will not happen because in this country, anything funded on the budget is subject to so much vicissitudes, it almost never happens. So I'll say that unless the donors were committed, forget it. And you ask me, well, what are the donors saying? Because that's not the world you track. I would say, well, the World Bank is saying no. And the World Bank is the most influential donor because the other donors have delegated thinking to the World Bank. So if you go to, unless they have other political interests, let's say the Americans want to stop terrorism or something. So in that instance, it doesn't matter what the World Bank thinks. But usually when it comes to development plan and execution, they think the World Bank have the expertise. So if the World Bank is not on board, you're not going to get other donors on board. That kind of analysis will then help you to determine, this Palugu Dam, they are giving me some contract. They say I should catch some sand, but this thing is not going to work. So that analysis around stakeholder management could be a whole area of engagement between policy analysts and project managers, in which both sides benefit tremendously. Also, project managers are more output oriented. You understand hard numbers better. You understand like, okay, this one, if we build this hospital, this is the capacity, this is the number of beds, this is the number of women it can treat, this is the number of men it can treat. You understand those things much better. Policy analysts on the other side look at outcomes. Will TB reduce? If you ask the project manager that kind of question, you are forcing them to overdo it a little. TB, what are the factors? Maybe 50 other factors. So policy analysts like myself are kind of big on the outcomes. What is the ultimate result? I think that project managers tend to be more focused on the outputs. So that's they understand it better and they can control it better. And that can be another area of conversation as well, moving from outputs to outcomes. So you did 100 beds. That was an output. But how many people actually occupied that bed? And how many of them actually got healed? That's a completely different conversation. It includes factors that a project manager may think is beyond their capacity. Then there's also the total project risk management. Like I said, there's multiple risks that the project is subject to. I would argue that the ones on the left, the economic, the government, the policy risks, are the domain of policy analysts. And the ones on the right, economical, ecological, environmental, management, financial, technical, it's much more safer for project managers to handle that. So if you want to understand the total picture of the risk of the project, having the policy analyst around the table and the project manager around the table, feeding into a common dialogue, could give you a better picture of the risks in the project. But for the purpose of this talk, I'm actually not going to focus on any of those frameworks at all. The framework that I think provides the best way for conversation is cost benefits. So going back to what we started with, project managers are better at estimating costs. Policy analysts are better at estimating benefits. And in our interactive session, I'm happy for that debate to continue. Those of you who think otherwise, I'm happy to hear from you. But my argument is that project managers are very good when it comes to the cost management, understand the issues of cost. We as policy analysts are much better when it comes to fighting around the benefits. Is this project useful or is it not useful and things like that? And you've seen us, do this in the context of Ajapa and multiple projects that you've seen us fight the government over. And it's rarely about only the cost, right? It's often of course, the cost being too much is often an example, but a lot of the time, the argument is that the benefits don't justify the costs. So with that as one of the ways in which we are going to think, I would say that for project managers, usually, and this is what the data shows, estimating errors constitute about 32% of the problems with cost overruns, which are a major subset of the way in which you analyze project viability, which is that the budget may not be enough. We budget 1 billion, we spend 1.5 billion. It's a big problem in Ghana. And what the data shows is that estimating errors is huge. But flawed estimates, how you actually design the estimates themselves, are also quite important. Your measuring model. And then we have a few other things like delivery and productivity and things like that. And I think in these areas, all of these areas, project managers have the expertise, whether as cost accountants or something other professional expertise to figure it out. I also think that, obviously, I gave you a sense that this is research that is kind of broad. This is not like Ghana-focused research alone. And you can see some of the cost overruns in terms of projects over there. So these are projects that, saw serious cost overruns. International Space Station alone, over $68 billion in terms of the cost overrun. And some of these other projects. So this is clearly a global problem. But the difference in our part of the world, I think, is that the regularity in which these overruns happen is getting out of hand, and I'll show that in a moment. The second thing is the proportionality, the amount of the budget that goes cover. If you are building a $170 billion International Space Station or a $500 billion International Space Station, and you go overboard by $68 billion, it's not as crazy as you start with $81 million for the Bank of Ghana headquarters, and you end up at $250 million, and the project is still not complete, right? So that proportionality is crazy. And then the affordability. Can we afford $200 million off? This is a country that says that $20 million spent on allowances, for teachers. It's like a big political debate. I mean, some people are winning elections and losing elections because of that, right? $20 million. And then one project, the cost overrun, not the cost overrun is $200 million. And we are all fine. So my argument is that affordability issue, whether we can afford that $200 million, is another issue. Salt pond decommissioning. They said, somebody told me that they could easily have done it $20-something million. They've already spent $96 million, and they need to spend another $90 million before they can complete it. And that will be subject to additional cost overrun. But that's still an estimate, it's still a projection. So these are examples of the craziness in terms of these cost overruns. My view is that even though a lot of us policy analysts say a lot about that in the media, it's actually you guys who should be talking a lot more about that. These are project management issues. So all of the project management issues around costs, I think, is your terrain. Of course, cost is one dimension, but another way in which cost is perceived is the time overruns. How often we just don't get anything done. Palugu Dam, we started talking about Palugu Dam in 1967. The first plan to do Palugu Dam was in 1967. And 1992, we did one of the first feasibility studies. 1967 to now, we've still not been able to build it, even though we want to build it. So time overruns is critical. And then with time overrun, often there's one easy framework in which you can use to analyze the time overrun. Is it coming from the contractor? Is it coming from the consultant, the client, or external sources? My argument is that project managers are still the best place when it comes to time overrun management. Good. Now, these are just examples. These are projects, big water projects in Ghana that are all around 10%. That's as of 2023. They were all, as of that year, 10% complete. And they have been on the drawing board for 20 years at least. Yendi town water issues, Sunyani town water issues, etc. So time overruns, to me, is a major area in Ghana. And then you look at it, you do the research, and you look through, you look at the data points, and you see that in Ghana, when you do the research, you conclude that about almost 96% of projects experience overruns in Ghana. That's huge. 96%. I mean, that's crazy. And then there are regions where 100%, every time you go there, 100% of projects cost overruns. Upper East, Central region. And then somewhere you have less cost overruns. Volta region is the best performing in terms of getting projects done on time and within budget. So that is interesting. Central region also does well up to a certain point. Well, that's the data. I'm not saying that it's kosher there. I'm just saying that in the data, they tend to do slightly better. Okay, so we come to our terrain, the policy analyst, because I said the cost is you guys, right? The project managers, you are great with the cost management and that side of things. On the benefit side, we tend to do better, I think, because like I said, a lot of the factors are intangible, they are ephemeral, etc. And it's not the areas that cost manager because the nature of your training, whether it's cost accountants, quantity surveyors, whatever it is, a discipline that you come into project management. That the nature of your training means that hard numbers matter more. So on the benefit side, a good example would be e-levy. I really look at the e-levy project and we said they're not going to get the 6 billion that they were talking about. That is impossible. It won't happen. And later on, if you are interested, I can go into a little bit detail of how we came to that conclusion that will not happen. But those articles are still online. You can read them. But we were very emphatic that maybe $150 million is more realistic. Not the 6 billion we were talking about was just ridiculous, right? We also were very clear about free SHS, about whether or not to reduce the dropouts. So if you do the analysis of the dropouts, what do you see? What you see is that, because the whole point of free SHS was dropouts. Nobody's left behind. No child left behind, right? That was the only reason to do free SHS. That if you didn't take the fees, you didn't absorb the fees, then a lot of parents can't pay, and that will lead to children missing education. So from JSS to, because nobody said we should do free JSS education, right? Because there's a lot of public JSS that was already free. So it was secondary school. The question was, then you must estimate those who will move from JSS to secondary school and estimate whether or not this free SHS policy makes it more likely for someone to move into secondary school than if the project was not there, right? So you just have to go and look at the numbers, and you see that we had about 109,000 dropouts between 2012. So the people that wrote BC in 2012, and then were supposed to have written WASE in 2015, the dropout rate was about 109,000 people, so about 29%, right? Okay, we did a great job by 2021 initially with free SHS. That number had dropped to 20%, right? Had dropped to 12.5%, and only 64,000 students were out of school. So I mean that in the initial phase, the project appeared to bear out, vindicate, by almost cutting dropout rate by about 40% or even more, 43% thereabout. Okay, but look at the 2024 rates. It's back to 20%. And we're now talking about 112,000. So more dropouts than in 2012. Of course, lower percentage. But the truth is that we've not solved dropouts with free SHS. Obvious fact. Just look at the numbers. What does that mean? It means that there are other things other than money keeping the children out. One of them is competing with earned labor. So if I'm a poor child from a poor family, my option is to go to school or to start working and making some money to help the family or help myself. So you cannot only compete by taking away the fees, obviously. You have to also figure out some bursary strategy if you want to remove dropouts completely. Fees alone will not do it. You have to give them actual money, which is the bursary model. Or you have to decide that you will live with a certain amount of dropouts. If you decide that you will live with a certain amount of dropouts, then the issue around free SHS becomes less political. But then it becomes, okay, there will always be dropouts. So are we focused on making sure that those who do good education are the best we can create? Or what do we focus on? You can now have multiple options because you accept that there will always be dropouts. And the data already shows that, now 7 years after free SHS, we still have 112,000 dropouts, right? That's what the data shows you. So whether you believe in free SHS or not, doesn't matter. The data is clear that it does not solve the dropout problem completely. So we call that a benefit shortfall. Benefit shortfalls are a fact of life. Every project where you do an estimation about the benefits, there will be shortfalls. And it's standard. The issue is why and what it tells you about the original project, right? And the way that we went about estimating the benefits, etc. My argument is that this is not the area for project managers. I think policy analysts do better there, the way that we look at this, and in terms of even the prediction of what will happen. So in terms of estimating the benefits, predicting the benefits, evaluating the benefits, that's our terrain. Your terrain is the costs. And if we accept that as the starting premise for our continued engagement, then we can get into the final part of my presentation, which is about the bankruptcy of Ghana. And I didn't say this is the deputy majority leader saying that Ghana is technically bankrupt. And he's an economist of very fine standing. So it's not easy to dismiss with his boot MB and all that. Now, we have a Ghana that is bankrupt. And I say that, for our conversation, let's simplify the equation. You project managers, you are worried about inflated costs, projects that cost too much. The headquarters of a Bank of Ghana, the headquarters of a central bank in a country like this should not cost more than 50 million. It should not cost more than 50 million. So let's say that's what worries you, and now it's going to be about 300 million. And then we say that the benefit shortfalls are pervasive. They build something, they tell us it's going to remove dropouts, and we learn that it's still 120,000 dropouts or something like that. They come up with plans for food and jobs, and they tell us it's going to make food inflation go down. And when food inflation is going through the roof, the minister says, no, this is annoying. I mean, I'm the minister. I've said there should be low food costs. And you're saying, no, that's not going to happen. I have power. So what are you going to do about it? Okay, get me trucks. Mr. Chief Director, get me trucks. Go to the hinterlands and bring the plantain and bring them here. Bring the plantain here. And then the plantains are brought. Then he declares a market open. And the famous DC Kwache of market open. Buyers buy. Problem solved. I like that. Problem solved. My argument that that's a benefit shortfall. It's not the benefit that was estimated. It was not sufficiently realized. So if we combine our insights, project managers and us, policy analysts, we come to a bankrupt republic. not very uplifting, but that is what we are dealing with. We are dealing with a country that's an IMF program where we've been told to reduce our national debt from about the 75% or 80% that it's moving towards to 55%. And we must do that before 2028. And the program has just 1 year left. By 2026, we are ending the IMF program. It can be extended. I'm saying that this current program is 2026. And I don't see the path to that 55%. There's only one path. One path to rebase the GDP, because the debt to GDP is debt over GDP. So you can wake up tomorrow and say the GDP, I'm sorry, it's double. I said it was 1 trillion, okay, it's 2 trillion. It's a why my statistical person, is there. Except in this case, the IMF was a bit smart. They also kept another ratio there, which if you did that, you have to deal with. And that is what? Revenue or tax to GDP. So if you double GDP to 1 trillion, and you are getting 200 billion Ghana cedis, which is what the man is promising, the new GRA boss, you go to 10% tax to GDP. 10% tax to GDP is not very nice because they say do what? 80% tax to GDP. So everywhere you pass, Charlie, the Oyibo man today. So that's where we are as a country. We have somebody sitting there, somebody from Washington. Occasionally they call your finance minister and say, but why did this thing? Why do you spend it? No, don't spend. No, I don't like that. And if you're not bankrupt, that will not be happening. So that is where we are as a country. And the question is whether or not we can solve it as a group, policy analysts and project managers. Well, let's use some concrete examples and to see how we would have approached it. Because clearly this country didn't approach any of this way. That I can assure you. You all live in this country. You didn't see this debate. So what we are going to do is if we were teamed up, you project managers had come to us, policy analysts, and we are teamed up. It's okay. We are going to evaluate National Cathedral, how we have done it, and see whether that's what we did in this country. So here is the National Cathedral. I say it's a holy mess. It's a holy mess. And what was it supposed to be? First, it was supposed to be a national interdenominational center. There are too many Christian groups in this country. We need one place, just like the Muslims, despite their different sects. They have one national mosque. So we have a national cathedral. Why it's called a cathedral, though, it's never been clear because a cathedral is the seat of an episcopal bishop. And we don't have a national bishop. So I don't know why they chose cathedral. But we assume we understand what they mean. A big church. So that's what a cathedral means. Not an episcopal seat of a bishop. It's a big church. Okay. It's also going to be a civic ceremonial center because they say we don't have a place that is solemn enough. If you're doing national events, we do. So swearing of the president, we go and put them in some open field. No. We need a nice, befitting structure for swearing in. That's very important. We also need a place where you can do, State of the Nation address, and it's not just the parliamentarians and a few guests, but bigger building and things like that. Third, we want it to become a pilgrimage site for African Christianity because Christianity has been in Africa longer than Europe, right? The Ethiopian eunuch. The Christianity came to Africa first, but somehow the Europeans have taken it over and want it back. We want our Christianity back. So we want to create a site to show that Africans, we own a stake in Christianity. So we're not only going to build a national cathedral, we're going to have a Bible museum. Don't forget that part. That's big. The theologian that they brought, there's a guy, this Norwegian trained theologian that they brought to head the thing. You should listen to him, man. About the Christian. Sometimes the grammar. You listen to the man. Say, hey, if you want to give me your money, you want to come to your bank account and say, Charlie, this theology, there's spiritual matters, deep spiritual matters. Anyway, so they want to build a biblical museum. And don't forget what the secretary said. Some people have read the Bible all their life. They have never eaten a fruit from the Holy Land. Not eaten a single fruit of the Holy Land. Just reading the Bible. We're going to do a biblical gardens, and every food that's in the Bible will manifest it in the restaurant in that garden. These are very important benefits, mind you. And then we will make it a site for godliness. You know, when the MPs and the ministers, when they see it, they stop stealing. You know, you the minute you have to, oh, come out, say, oh no, no stealing anymore. Okay, I think what you guys and those of us, I'm here representing all policy analysts in Ghana, right? I've endowed myself with that crown. So what you guys and us as policy analysts, what we can agree on is that the evaluation of the cost and the benefit could have been more comprehensive. They should have done an attempt to actually put out on document that kind of details it. Like this is the conversation we've had on what are the costs and what they know. And then we could have had decisions around these promises. Would they really pan out, given our history, other projects of similar nature? When we're doing the National Theatre, we never said whenever it has problems, you have to go and beg other donors because the Chinese give you a National Theatre. Maintain it to you. Say when the thing is a problem, we need another donor. Maybe it's a problem. So given that history, we are going to do a national cathedral. We will have had a conversation about contingencies, right? The third thing is committed funding. I mean, where is the funding? I can't believe that you can go into a project like this and leave the funding hazy. I mean, seriously. I think if any of you guys, the project managers, were in that room, you would have either got up and started screaming or gone under the table out of embarrassment, right? Because the funding is like this. And then some of the intangibles that they promise, you know, this place will become a pilgrimage Mecca, you know, we'll be competing with Jerusalem, all of these claims. I think some of them could have been subjected to a bit more, you know. Oh, no, it's serious. You should listen to some of the speeches. But I think where we have, given the nature of this talk, where we have even more to offer, I think, is in the uncertainties. Because all these cost and benefit, doesn't matter what project you are doing, whether it's a national cancer referral hospital or a national cathedral. A lot of the contingencies require the exercise of professional judgment. And professional judgment is in this room. There are project managers who can tell you that looking at that thing you have put out there, that drawing, this 100 million to work. So they start at $100 million and they are now at $400 million, right? Some of those conversations around exercising professional judgment, I think there are more project management people in the room. I mean, I have nothing against the great men in CASOPs. They are very important, right? But you can't build such a massive project and the governing board, there's not a single project management professional. Did you guys notice that? Maybe you didn't pay attention. There was not a single project management professional in that room. Yeah, I know that if they summon the angels and things change. I know that. All I'm saying is that sometimes they take time before they manifest. So given that fact, the gap between the time the angels manifest and the time the project has to be done, we need some project management people in the room as well. No, that's true. We need some project management person in the room. So my view is that exercising professional judgment was critical. And then the probabilities themselves, exercising whether this cost will materialize, this benefit will materialize, require more research. And that is also the domain of people like the project, the policy analysts that you invited to give you this talk. On the cost side, I think, like I said, the certainties around those are much more straightforward, at least for two areas. We know the land that was given to the 14 acres of prime land. If you use any of the usual sources of trying to get data on cost of pricing in Central Accra, you get to maybe around $100 million for this. Roughly $7.something million an acre is, and that is actually being very optimistic because there are half plots going for $500,000 in cantonments. So $100 million is conservative. Then they decided to demolish everything else in the way, right? So passport office gone, number of diplomatic buildings gone, appeal court judge buildings gone. Just went with the bulldozer and cleared them out. Then some of these people said, no, we need compensation. So compensation costs. Some of these I'm not putting in there because there are disputes about the exact amounts, but we have rough numbers which in the end are tally. Then you have to relocate some of the buildings, right? And a lot of people talk about the increased traffic. Can you imagine that spot? And what is the cost of that? And that will require you to do some estimation as well. Then the cathedral building itself was about $400 million. That one we know for sure because ECHA, which is the company, Rizzi the ECHA, gave some information out inadvertently that some of us then got. And that tells you where the project of the building itself, that cost was going. Then we forget about the biblical gardens. Like I keep saying, don't forget the gardens. And then the museum. People think the museum is just the building. No, it's the artifacts. The things in there that are so precious that people will come and watch. Those things don't cost, they're not cheap. Let me give you an example. If you get, let's say, the Dead Sea Scroll, you got a parchment of the Dead Sea Scroll, you can sell that for easily $2 million. Not the whole Dead Sea Scroll, one parchment. So you want historic objects from the Middle East, you're going to have to bid for it, my brother, my sister. I mean, Yes, it's all God's work, but it costs money. The people that go and collect these things, they don't give for free because it's God's work. So by the time you are through with that, I'm sure at least $200 million will have been spent, because similar costs in other Bible museums elsewhere. Even if we scale the ambition to another project I'll show you very soon, where it was a much smaller project, you're still talking about maybe $50 million for that project. Then you are talking about the maintenance outlay, because we always forget that. You need to project the maintenance forward, right? And all of these costs, if you are doing cost-benefit analysis, one thing you have to remember, present value, because the cost manifests over time. And you have to look at what would that cost mean today. Money today is always worth more than money 3 days after, right? So you need to do PV. But the funny thing that people don't often pay attention to is, what is the discount rate I'm using for that PV? So we have something called social discounting, where we say, okay, this is not a profit-making project. So if we're operating in dollar terms, and this was like a European social project, we'll be using something in the region of about 3%, 4% as your discount rate for social discounting. Here in CD, given the alternative use of capital, the pressure on alternative use of capital, you have to remember 25% discount rate, which for those of you who are a little financial in this room, that already start, your head is spinning, say, hey, this number. But at least on a present value basis, in CDs, it's not that bad. In dollars, on the other hand, you have to lower it. So if you do all of that math, you get to something like $1.2 billion conservative as the cost, as conservative, $1.2 billion. Remember that the national budget is about $8 billion, right? So that tells you a lot. Benefits. Here is why I think we didn't do any analysis at all as a country. I think we did a bit of conversation around the cost. It wasn't comprehensive enough, but the benefits are not at all. The key benefits was that this was going to be an event location. The second one was religious tourism. The third one was general tourism. And there's something about Christian feel good, which is very intangible, very hard to measure. Christians are going to wake up in the morning, eating less, and maybe drinking more water, because there's a national cathedral in the country. So those ones challenging, but we'll try our best. When you start to do benefit analysis, there's a tool that you have to become very comfortable with because of the nature of that exercise. And that is the tool of benchmarking. Because often the exact benefits is not possible to kind of point to. Like, this building, the National Mosque, what was it? What is exact? The Muslims in this country, are they eating less cocoa and drinking more? Eating less cocoa and drinking more cocoa? It's not clear. So trying to then compute that and do a benchmarking, is challenging. But the only thing you can do is try and compare and say, okay. So we use all the benchmarking to try and make sense of the benefits that they are projecting, because they're saying that the cathedral will pay for itself many times more, right? So one of the first things you do is look at tourism numbers, right? And say, in the world, which sites get the most tourists and how much do they generate? You will not be surprised to learn that religious sites don't feature in the top 10. Human beings are very religious, but for some reason, when it comes to our pleasure, it always seems to supersede God. So all the top 10, are not religious. So that already started to tell you certain things, right? Then you go to, okay, let's look at religious, right? Stop talking plenty, just focus on the religious side. What is happening there? What is happening is that, yes, there are religious sites that are getting a lot of visitors and they are charging for entry. I went to the Duomo in Milan, and I'm sure if somebody saw me going to the Duomo in Milan, I would have taken a picture, put it on social media, and put a big banner, hypocrites. This is a guy who doesn't like National Cathedral. Look at him, he's going to Duomo. So these are the top ones. There is something that is very, very evident about this, which I will come to in a moment. But pay attention to them. So St. Patrick Basilica, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, where Jesus Christ is assumed to have been, laid on the stone and buried in the tomb. So there's a church built around the tomb by the wife of Constantine, St. Helena, when he came to Jerusalem. And that site is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And it's one of the most visited. I have done it myself. And then you have, the Nativity in Bethlehem, which is actually now on the Palestinian side, not on the Israeli side. Westminster Abbey in London, the place where you have Poets' Corner, all the big important people in the UK are buried there, etc. So these are very important buildings. St. Peter's is, of course, the Vatican, right? You don't have to say more. The good thing is that in other places, they've done very detailed research about the impact of large church buildings. Believe it or not. Almost everything you are trying to do, somebody has spent more time figuring out than you have. And your first duty as a researcher is to acknowledge that, which is why we do literature review, right? You acknowledge that other people may have spent more time thinking about it. So in Britain, they've done very detailed work trying to understand these cathedrals they have. They have like 42 important cathedrals in the country. And they wanted to understand what benefit does it bring to us as a country. And they went into it in great detail to look at that. So in coming to the position that I hold now, and in preparing myself to come and speak to you, I decided to analyze that to great detail. So you see how they look at the direct effect, indirect, and how those channels go through, and how then eventually you get some number. It's very interesting when I tell you the number for all 42 cathedrals, the benefits in a year. It's very interesting. The other thing is that they also do good classification, because a cathedral is not a cathedral, right? It depends on where it is, depends on what's its history, etc. So they do the classification in a way that I think is very important, because we will try and place our cathedral somewhere there. So the top level, on the top level, right, you have the large importance. The cathedrals, those they are of international prominence. These are cathedrals that people outside the United Kingdom have heard of. Canterbury, York, Durham. These are big, massive cathedrals. One funny thing about those cathedrals, though, is all of them are historic cathedrals. So large and of international prominence, the underlying factor still seems to be it must still be historical. So Canterbury, for instance, 597, that was the year 597. That's almost 1,500 years ago. That's when it was built. St. Paul, 17th century. Everybody remembers Sir Christopher Wren. So quite old. Then we have York, which was around 11th century. And you have Durham, which is also around 11th century. So you are talking of buildings that are 1,000 years and 1,000 years old. These are not just any buildings. That's very important. Then you have some other buildings and other categories that are medium-sized but historic cathedrals like Oxford and others. When you do the analysis, even the large historical ones of international prominence, they don't make more than £6 million a year. Yes, they don't make more than $8 million a year. So if you said, my analysis time frame is 10 years, and you maybe 20 years, and you discounted it, you still find out that the large cathedrals are bringing in less than $100 million a year into the UK over 20 years. So when you hear that $1.2 billion number, I want you to start to think hard. These are cathedrals that were built 1,500 years ago in countries that are the seat of Christianity, like all Anglicans in the world. The Canterbury is their seat, not just a segment of Anglicans, all Anglicans in the world. St. Peter's Basilica, right? Catholics, 1 billion of them around the world. That's their ancestral home. So these numbers are very interesting. And when it comes to average, it's less than $2.5 million a year, 2.5 million pounds a year. So there are $3 million a year, less than $3 million a year. That's the average historic major cathedral in the UK. That gives you an idea about what is possible in Ghana. And then when you look at the average in terms of attendance, you find out that, because you might say that, well, maybe we'll get more attendance than the rest. Well, the entire tourist figures for Ghana, the entire number of international tourist arrivals in Ghana is just about 1.1 million. All the tourists that come to Ghana. You can see that the large cathedrals, they get over 3.2 million, just the cathedral. And yet still the money, I was telling you, the money is less than $6 million, right? 6 million pounds. So for Ghana to even start to make the cathedral become important enough that is competing with these other ones, we have to triple our national tourist arrivals just to accommodate that. Think of airports, hotels. So essentially, it's almost like if you get 6 million, all the things that would have happened would have made the 6 million irrelevant. Because you'll have had to double your international airport size, build maybe 50 more hotels. What has that then got to even do a cathedral? So the numbers would not have mattered. Doesn't matter how many people came. The monetary values never added up. Doesn't matter how they looked at it, because we have good benchmarking data to look at it. Then we look at the Bible Museum, the crown piece, the jewel in the crown. And then we look at other Bible museums, because that's another way you do it, is look at the experience of other Bible museums. The American Bible Society itself set up a museum for $60 million. And they had to close it down in 3 years. This is the American Bible Museum. America is one of the most Christian countries in the world. That's the home of America, a global evangelical movement. And they have over 300-something million people in that country. Over 200 million of them profess the Christian faith. They could not keep a Bible museum running. 3 years they shut down. You know the total revenue per year they were making on average? $54,000. And they were selling tickets for $10 each, which is probably not what you can sell it for. Because if you sell a ticket to enter the National Cathedral in Ghana for 150 cedis, and $54,000. And the American Bible Society had to shut down its museum. Also, trying to actually build a Bible museum is a nightmare. How you get those historical artifacts people can look at? One of the biggest Bible museums in the world is the Museum of the Bible in DC. And it's funded by billionaires who have made so much money and want to support their faith. This museum tried to get artifacts from the Middle East for people to come, attractions, Dead Sea Scrolls, cuneiforms, things like that. Thousands of them turned out to be fake. And eventually got people arrested and they had to return them back. Millions of dollars were spent and they got fake items because there's a lot of trade. There's a big trade in fake religious objects, artifacts. So for instance, there was a rare piece that they bought for $1.6 million that the US Department of Homeland Security said was stolen from Iraq and then sold to an antiquities dealer. And they were very angry with them. They had to come there, get them to send the thing back and pay fines. So this is very funny, but I find it the most interesting of it all. Then we wanted a consultant. We wanted a consultant to help us build this amazing Bible museum. We hired the same person who designed that museum that got into trouble with the fake artifacts. And then we gave him $6 million. A gentleman called Carrie Summers. This is the man. So he's the man charming our very Christian finance minister. You can see him working the charm very effectively. Up to date, nobody has accounted for how that money got spent, right? Because he was supposed to use this money to bring this Bible museum to life. But they should have just checked, of all the problems that the Bible museum that he worked for, it got before they hired him and gave him all these millions of dollars. And I mean, the money that they gave to him, all the dialysis patients in Ghana could be taken care of at no cost if we decided to use that money for that purpose. So this is why these benefits match up things are very important. Anyway, so I was looking at the Bible museum, the biggest Bible museum in the world, the one that I mentioned I've had a lot of problems. I was looking at their numbers and I was surprised. Despite the very massive contributions, you see the contributions that we were making. 2019, the billionaires behind it gave 129 million. 2023, they gave almost $48 million. Despite all those contributions, the entity had made losses every year from 2020 to 2023. Every single year, except 2022. So even with tens of millions of dollars of contributions, the biggest Bible museum in the world makes losses. What convinces us that we can make profits from Bible museum? I mean, what's the data? What's the analysis? Nothing like that. And in fact, none of this was discussed ever. So when we now begin to look at the cost-benefit ratio, the benefits, the most generous I can come up with is $120 million in benefit over 10 years. Sorry, over 20 years. And of course, I showed you the most conservative cost, about $1.2 billion. So your cost-benefit ratio is 0.1, which in project management, in CBA terms, cost-benefit analysis terms, means like that's a terrible project. You don't even want to look at it twice. And remember that we did not only look at dollar numbers. We made an effort to quantify the benefits beyond the construction, right? That's the nature of the CBA tool, and when it's actually most powerful, it gives you this powerful number. And then you put the burden on the other person and say, prove to me that the numbers are not correct. How much terrorists are you expecting? How much will they pay? How much is the additional infrastructure we need to support them? You do those numbers, and the whole debate stops being you said, I said, right? And I think, therefore, that the CBA tool that I just shared with you today is also very powerful as a dialogue tool. Because sometimes we just have these conversations and it's not clear where we are starting, where we are ending. So my argument is that just using this, what is your set of benefits or the set of costs? Somebody just publishing that, a supporter of the program, with some of these numbers, and then somebody else publishing another one. And then we now watch them debate on news file or something. And you kind of listen and say, no, that guy is making more sense. I think that would have been better as a way of getting to grips whether this was a great project or not. So I'm not only proposing cost-benefit analysis to you as a technical tool, I also think it's a great dialogue tool for politics and debate in this country. What we just did today was very helpful. It also will have opened up discussion around this $1.2 billion in costs. Could they have been used for similar things but with a different pedigree? Think of Confanoche's hometown, Ukuagua, and this is the family home. This is one of the most prominent non-Christian religious leaders in our history. Why is the family home like that? Maybe $1 million could make a big difference. And then think about the Padmore Museum or the Du Bois Museum. Think of the Padmore Museum, the Du Bois Museum, things where we have true, authentic heritage and connections to Ghana as one of the world's leading sites of Pan-Africanism. This is something that is truly distinct. Christianity in Ghana is not very distinct. There are many, many Christian countries in the world. And I've mentioned Jerusalem, I've mentioned Rome, I've mentioned Canterbury. There are places where Christianity is much better associated with internationally. But there is no Confanoche anywhere else except in Ghana. George Padmore did not go and make any other country his home except Ghana. Same with Du Bois. We didn't get Marcus Garvey, but we are getting there. So my point is that these are things that we are distinct worldwide. And then we could have spent far less. Today, Du Bois Museum, we are begging Americans to come and donate there. And there's a whole fight because they've given the project to some foundation, and the current foreign minister is against it and things like that. Because we won't spend even $1 million maintaining these sites. And these are the sites that are truly historic and have real connection to our heritage. So the cost-benefit analysis tool that we just did now allows you to do the same for all of these projects, maybe 100 of them, and you will end up in saying, okay, $250 million for those. And these are the benefits. And the cost-benefit ratio will look far better than the National Cathedral. 200 of heritage projects truly connected to Ghana. And to my mind, it's surprising that we had a country of this size and scope, and the debate never took that turn. It's very surprising that we couldn't even basically get to a cost-benefit analysis comparison of different projects. So the job for you guys, project managers, is massive. It's a country waiting to be taken. This picture just tells you that even in Christianity, we have heritage sites in Christianity in Ghana. Remember the Basel missionaries in Ekuapem and the cocoa thing that they set up there? That is way more historic. That's 19th century. Stuff that connects us to the Basel missionaries around the world that nobody has spent $1 on. That's truly authentic. This is the Cathedral Basilica of Our Lady of Sorrows in Navrongo. It was built in 1906. One of the oldest, and connected to who? The White Fathers. This is an established strand of theology in African missionary context. And yet still, we didn't want to go there and make it much more prominent. Why do you want to build something new in Accra when we have Navrongo Cathedral, which has true history? The first missionaries from the Catholic Church that went all the way from Navrongo into Burkina Faso and the rest. And so when you see some of the northern, the upper east, upper west Christian communities that we have today in the midst of Islam, it's because of this. That's history. That's real history that I can go there and say, okay, this is how come some Christianity is implanted in a region that is primarily Islamic. And National Cathedral is built right from the ground up, no history, no heritage, not connected to any aspects of the faith. Somehow gets $1.2 billion. And these massive buildings get nothing. So if you're a Catholic leader and you support the National Cathedral, I get a bit confused, a bit perplexed. There are a lot more authentic sites of Christian heritage in Ghana that could benefit. So the last case study is Palugu Dam. I'm not going to spend more than 5 minutes on it. Just quick, only to illustrate certain things that are not illustrated with the cathedral. So a few other ideas. So this is the Palugu Dam. It's like $1 billion project. It's supposed to have 3 main functions. It's 3 projects rolled into one. It's a power plant, and I'll come to that in a moment. It's also an irrigation complex. It's supposed to help farmers farm all year round, because when the rains don't fall in the north, it gets really difficult to plant. And then thirdly, it's supposed to manage the flooding that the whole belt is now experiencing. And so more or less, you have 3 different projects, but somehow they are integrated. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So this is the launch of the Palugu Dam. It was steeped in political tension because that part of the country is also where the vice president comes from. In fact, some of the ancillary benefits of the dam was to provide water in Wale Wale, which is the political capital of the Mamprisi Kingdom. Right? I think Nalirugu is the royal capital, but in terms of Wale Wale is the political capital of the Mamprisi Kingdom. So for that reason, you can see the Mamprisi chiefs in their splendor there. This project, like I said in the very beginning, had political validation. Forget about the cost and all this we discussed in this room. There's other forces at work. But I still think that our cost-benefit analysis tools still come handy. We've spent almost $70 million on feasibility studies on Palugu Dam since it started. $70 million on feasibility studies. Because we keep doing them. Everybody brings his consultant and collects some. And on top of that, we've also paid a contractor $12 million, and we've really not, he's left the country. He's a Chinese contractor. And he's left us with 3 interim payment certificates, which also cost about $12.something million, which we have to pay. So all in all, we spent about $100 million. We've not seen a single piece of a dam. it raises, of course, fascinating issues. The only thing we had was this nice PR brochure from VRA showing that the workers had a camp. The workers had a very beautiful camp. You look at the blue tiles, the blue roof. That's the only thing really we've had out of this project. And that camp is now destroyed as well because the contractor, when he was leaving, unpacked most of the things that were there and then carried them away to China. It will shock you to know that one of the big parts of the project, one of the justifications for the project, which is to stop flooding in the north, is actually not scientifically validated. If you talk to actual water scientists in Ghana, they say it makes no sense. Dams don't stop flooding. Dams actually have to be managed for flood. That's why when you built Akosombo, so many parts of the region flooded, and we've had to continue to manage them. We don't build a dam to try and manage flooding. It's very rare that you do that. You build a series of dikes to attempt to stop flooding. It's a different engineering concept. Dams, on the other hand, when you build them, you spend a lot of time thinking about stopping the flooding that originates from the dam. So there are professors in this kind, like Professor Miller and the rest, who have said this several times. Nobody listens to them. Like, look at this, my area, this is my expertise. It doesn't work. Okay, yeah, you sit there, you sit in the university. We'll come to you later when we finish spending the money. So that is one funny fact about this dam, which is that one of the three main projects actually is not viable, the flood retention. The other fact is also that actually a lot of the flood comes down into Akosombo. So when you dam it up there, you're going to have less water flowing into Akosombo, which is an avoided benefit in a sense, or a contingent cost that we never analyze, etc. So there's a lot about that project. I'm not going to go into great detail. The only reason I brought it up is this sheet. When the project was being designed, there were 5 options about what could be the project. You could do the project. I was simplified by calling it configurations. There were 5 different potential configurations. That is a different way to think as well. You could say that with the National Cathedral, maybe we could have configured it differently. Maybe remove the Bible Museum and rather brought a monument for Ghanaian Christianity. Are there Ghanaian priests who have done great things in Ghana? What have they done? Maybe this is an exhibition for them. Maybe it cost us 2 million. Maybe we could have changed it from being a national cathedral in that sense and made a conference center for it for civic occasions, and that will cost maybe 10 million or whatever. So different project configurations can lead to different costs and benefits, which we didn't discuss earlier. The same project, you can configure it differently. And here you see that, depending on emphasis they place on the dam and its capabilities, emphasis they place on the irrigation complex and the flood management, they came up with different concepts, and then they selected the one that they finally chose, which I think is option 3. No, option 5, I think. Let me check the dam. No, they chose option. No, not option 1. They showed this one, option 5, 59 megawatts. And that's what I'm using to detect. I forgot a little bit about the detail, but it ended up being 59 megawatts. The 59 megawatts was considered ridiculously low. I mean, if you think of car power, the ship that they brought from Turkey, because we could not generate power for ourselves. Somebody brought a power plant on a ship from Turkey, docked it in Takrade, and connected it to our system. These are the guys that when they threaten that they're going to cut it off, everybody start panicking in Ghana. That alone is over 400 megawatts or something. I mean, our energy experts are in the room. That combined ship, the two, is about 400 and something megawatts. So a 59 megawatt plant is almost nothing. But you can see that the cost of that 59 megawatts was over 200 and something million dollars. 287 million, sorry. And then some of the issues around the irrigation complex and the rest were different costs, which you then add to this. But the reason why the costs differ for the dam design is that the height of the dam will impact how much you have for the irrigation, which will then impact the electricity you generate, which will then impact how much flooding can be contained. And that is not flooding from Bagre spills and things like that. Because in Akosombo, with its 100 and something billion cubic meters, cannot control flooding from Bagre. When they spill it from Burkina Faso, they spill it over back into the community. So to talk of a smaller dam closer to it, Akosombo is far downstream. To talk of a smaller dam closer to Burkina Faso, stopping flooding, Bagre dam flood is just madness. So when I'm talking flooding, I'm talking about the flooding that the dam will generate. You get the point? So that flooding, the design of the system will have impact whether or not you can also do the flood management for the dam itself. Which means the way you configure the project changes the different benefits matrix that you get. You have more power, bigger dam, but more flooding. So you have more flooding issues. So it got really complicated. And at some point, the World Bank just gave up. Because that's not how you do it. And that is called multi-criteria decision analysis. Is the last point I wanted to leave you, the last framework that you should dig into. This is where multiple criteria around the project, depending on how you configure, will change the outcome. And you have to do your chains. You literally have to do chains. If I made this, I chose this criterion, or I chose this parameter, and then I change this is the output, etc. And then the whole configuration is an alternative for the same project. So we are no longer comparing multiple projects. We're comparing the same project in different configurations. And that is what happened at Palugu until finally we got something that we thought, we liked, but none of the donors liked. And then we said we'll fund it ourselves with Eurobond proceeds and then the budget. We were supposed to release some money to the contractor. We refused to release the full amount. The contractor took the first amount. When the rest was not released in the rest of the year, he packed his bag and left. So that's what we had with Palugu. And the reason that I wanted to bring it up is, of course, this multi-criteria decision-making framework. Last point is that cost-benefit analysis is not jollof rice. Not everybody likes it. And it's also not the blood of Jesus. It doesn't wash away every sin. So even cost-benefit analysis has its own defects as well. And some of those you can think about, a lot of the subjectivities. I see the prediction differently, you see the prediction differently, etc. Some of that can be solved by you putting your numbers and your assumptions. By listing your assumptions, I can determine whether I accept it or not. And issues around intangibles, like I described. How do we quantify Christian happiness in Ghana? Because the cathedral has been built. You can try with a survey, but we now know that declaratory research is not very effective. It's not very scientific. People say one thing, do another thing. So maybe you can put probes into people's brains, let them watch the National Cathedral and then measure the, the dopamine levels. That one, they can't fake it. It's okay, this dopamine level. And if you did maybe 100 Christians and you get the number of dopamine level fluctuations, it's okay, yeah, feel good, marked. So that is very difficult. Then people also think that even this whole thing of reducing everything to money, they just feel uncomfortable about it because they just feel like it's not really viable philosophically. So these are some of the challenges we did, but I'm very happy that you spent an hour listening to me. How much time I spent?